Welcome back to another episode of the Packs What She Said podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Maggie Loney, joined as always by Perri Goldstein. And this week, as has become customary during the draft season, we have a special guest joining us, Andrew Mertig of the Pack a Day podcast. Andrew, we already chatted a couple days ago, but I'm happy I get to talk to you another time this week.
Well, it is truly an honor and a privilege to be back. I love that I get to talk a little bit of draft with y'all on the best named podcast in all of Packers podcasting. Packs What She Said.
That's so kind. Wow. Maggie thought of it, so she gets all the credit.
Yeah, Patrick Taylor liked it, and then he left the Packers. So I think what we've learned is that we shouldn't shouldn't bring players on that we're hoping to keep long term in Green Bay. But yeah, wanted to get your thoughts. I know every year you put out your own big board, which cannot even begin to think about how much effort that takes. I go through like 20 or 30 prospects at each position, and that exhausts me. So I don't know how you quantify them and put them all into a ranking, but maybe to get started, if you want to kind of give us like an overview of some of your favorite prospects in general, for this year's draft, and then we can kind of take a deeper dive into some of the best fits for the Packers later on in the show.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of ways to like sort of approach that topic. Like, who are my favorites? Well, there's the obvious ones at the top, right? For me, Joe Alt is overall player one. I liked him so much. I didn't think anybody would be able to exceed Marvin Harrison Jr., but I really liked Joe Alt to that point. And I've sort of floated the idea that, hey, maybe if the Packers are serious about drafting a tackle and Joe Alt slips far enough, maybe they'd be willing to like really go all in and trade up. They won't. But a boy can dream, right? I think, I like Terrion Arnold, the cornerback out of Alabama, more than most. He's my 6th overall player. I think he's really fun. I have Chop Robinson from Penn State as my 1st overall edge player, which is probably a little rare. There's some wide receivers that I'm probably higher on the consensus, like Troy Franklin from Oregon or Keon Coleman from Florida State. I think that, once you get into that late first round, I'm pretty close to consensus. There's probably a few players I'm a little bit lower on, but yeah, getting in the second round, there were some guys I thought that were going to be like sleepers for me, like players I liked a lot more than the consensus, but I've seen people really creeping in on my Marshawn Kneeland territory, the edge out of Western Michigan. I really thought I was going to be super high on him, and now all of a sudden he's getting second round buzz. There's a ton of players to really like in this draft. I am a little bit closer to consensus than I think I normally am. And so, I don't know, that's a good place to be.
That's very interesting. I feel like the draft is like a week or two too long. And so people kind of like come like full circle. Like you get like, okay, like the big board, like the way it should be. And then everyone like spends some time, and then you kind of start getting your hot takes because like you can't talk about the same things for like too long, and people start to go like haywire. And then the few days leading up to the draft, everyone kind of like evens itself back out.
I hope so. So yesterday, if you had asked me, because I saw all the tweets of people saying like, oh, they just need to push the draft up 2 weeks. And I was like, yeah, but then there's that really, really long dead zone everybody forgets about after the draft. And it's so boring. But after today,
I don't think they need to, because like the draft discussion is, like I said, there's this cycle and it's so funny. And like, then what would we talk about while we wait for everyone to, report to camp? Nothing.
Yeah, I normally would agree, but then I saw what happened on Twitter today, and it's just turning into a toxic waste dump of hot takes and
as it
people
does.
being really upset about weird things. So I mean, move it up, don't move it up. I guess I just need to log off social media.
See, so I'm glad you mentioned some players that, were like consensus higher up, because I had 2 going into like the draft cycle. I don't know, maybe late January, early February, that I had circled, and they were Darius Robinson out of Missouri, and then Dominic Pooney. And I was like, those are two Packers if I've ever seen two Packers. And then all of a sudden now they're like ascending the big boards and everybody's like, oh, these are such Packers fits. And I'm like, dang, I thought that was gonna be like I thought that was gonna be, something that I got to call my shot on. And clearly no, they're Packer fits like through and through. So do you have any prospects that you have looked at? And because I think sometimes we know, right? Like we can watch enough Packers football to identify whether it's, the high athletic score and the freaky traits that a player has, but we can typically look at a player and say, yeah, I don't think they're a Green Bay fit, or oh yeah, that's meant to be a Packer.
I for sure. I am not the person who is going to get into the Packers. Oh, I don't even want to use this word after today, but thresholds. I am almost always wrong, right? Because I don't pay attention to that. I look at players more holistically, league wide. So I'm sure someone will correct me if I get this wrong, but that's fine. That's what I'm here for. I think defensive lineman Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State is a really fun guy that's kind of off the radar. Probably more like a second round pick, maybe sneaks into the third. I think he's got a lot of fun upside. Like he is as explosive as those top two guys. That everybody sort of thinks are going to go in the first round. On the defensive line, but I think Michael Hall, maybe just the production wasn't necessarily there in Ohio State because of his usage, and he could be a sneaky pick in the second round. One of those, like the Packers take a second round defensive lineman who didn't have a lot of college production. Everybody's losing their mind sort of players. I think Peyton Wilson, the linebacker out of NC State, like total Packers kind of player. It's just like, is he going to clear the medicals? And no one knows that. So, he's a guy that if the Packers picked him at 25, wouldn't be super shocked. If he falls into the third round, wouldn't be super shocked. Like it all just depends on if he can get cleared. And the Packers medical staff tends to be very conservative when it comes to that. But yeah, like toolsy, really high upside kind of guy. He is older, so maybe doesn't perfectly fit the Packers metrics. I really like Trey Benson, the running back out of Florida State. If the Packers are going to take a swing at a running back like late 2, early 3, he's the guy that I would be really on board with, and I think really fits what they're looking for.
Yeah. I like all of those names, so I would be fully on board with it. I know that Michael Hall could come in for a top 30 visit. Not sure. It seems like they're focusing on defense, which Perri and I talked. It seems like they always are focused on defense,
Yeah.
but the top 30 visits have been kind of telling, especially in the Gutekunst tenure, where if they bring them in, it's kind of an indication that they're really interested. And so I don't know if any of those names are on your radar, but particularly, but quite a few names jumped out at me as like, oh, okay, so the Packers have a type again this year and they're doing their due diligence at a certain number of positions.
I think as far as the like 30 visits, where are we trying not to use the top term now? I don't know. I can't follow along, but I don't pay super close attention to that because the Packers use that as a smoke screen so frequently, at least for their top guys. I think that is a little bit more predictive when you get into day 3 in the UDFAs that they're sniffing around those players for some reason. So I don't have like the complete list because I don't normally like monitor that very closely, but were there any that really stuck out to you? They did in fact bring in Pooney, right?
If they did, I think that was recent.
Oh, I didn't see that him either, but I was going to say, I think sometimes the 30 visits can be a bit of a smokescreen just because like you never know what team, also like other teams are probably looking to see like who visited where, and it always gets announced. And so, if who's picking before or after the Packers is like, well, he went in there. So it can be a bit of like a strategic tool. So you never know.
I'm really personally conflicted on the first round this year. And we say that every year, right? But like, I think last year we maybe didn't expect it to be Lucas Van Ness, but we all were like, Yeah, that's like a very Packers pick. Like that made a ton of sense. So it wasn't shocking, even if it wasn't necessarily what, the national media was mocking at the time. So is there, I guess, let's do it this way. Who would be your ideal pick if you're the GM? And then who do you think is most closely the Packers pick on draft night?
Well, I do have to say one thing. If we're gonna bring Lucas Van Ness up, I was on your show shortly after the draft last year, like losing my mind that they took Lucas Van Ness, and the whole context behind that was I just thought like Jordan Love going into that really make or break season, not having the weapons that he needed was going to be a humongous problem. And Perri was talking me off the cliff because you were like Jaden Reed, like really good. I think he's gonna be really good. They're doing their job, and like who was right there, of course. So
they took
why am I the
offensive
draft
weapons after the first round?
So I don't know. I forgot what your question is now, Maggie, because I was in apology mode.
Thank you so much.
Who you think the Packers will pick in the first round, and then your ideal pick for them if they differ.
Oof. Yeah, the whole like we
not
have
counting
no
Joe
idea.
Alt. Not counting Joe Alt.
It's so apparent this year, and I do mock drafts, maybe like once a day or once every other day now that like my board is done, and I cannot decide what to do here because some days I'm like, ooh, trading up seems really appealing. Like you could grab a really great defensive player because so many offensive players are going to go top 10, top 15, and somebody's going to slide and you can invest your capital that way. Sometimes I'm like, ooh, trading down, like there's a lot of really good players in the top 100 of this draft, and getting another pick sounds really appealing. And then I listened to Andy on the Pack a Day podcast with his 7 situations, and he's talking about trading out of the first completely and acquiring a 2025 first round pick from a team that might be bad like Denver. And I'm like, ooh, that sounds really appealing. So I've really twisted myself up here. I think you could probably list 15 players, and I wouldn't be surprised if they got picked at 25. I think the Packers could also, trade up to 16. I think they could trade down and into the second round and, accumulate even more day 2 capital. For me, I don't know. I think, Cooper DeJean is somebody who is now intriguing to me after being wildly resistant to him through most of this draft process. And I really like Cooper DeJean. I just thought he was a terrible fit at cornerback for the Packers. And now I'm really getting around. I went back and looked at him and I was like, can this guy really play safety? And the idea of him as a free safety-ish, however the Packers, I don't know what Jeff Hafley is going to do, but, if they want to play a little bit more split safeties, he's a really secure tackler. He's got really good instincts. I think early downs, he can be a more like versatile, modern-ish safety. And on third down, he could be a tight end eraser. And I'm really loving that idea. Now, does he get to 25? None of us know at this point, right? Like the Eagles are tied to him and they pick before the Packers. There's several other surprise teams that could scoop him up before. If I had to make a bet, I would bet very, very little money. But Cooper DeJean is probably my favorite at this point.
I don't know if I've ever been this like ambivalent.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Yeah. Like I'm just kind of like, I do not have a draft crush. I do not have a sense of what the Packers are going to do. Like to your point, Maggie, like the LVN pick last season was just so Packers. Like it was easy to get behind because it was like, well, that makes absolutely perfect sense for them. Like I don't know if there's really a player in this draft that I feel any particular way about in the first round. The one time I got excited was when Andy Herman was like, well, and I think to your point, Andrew, is like if there's a run on offensive players and you start to get into the teens, right, for defensive players, and the Packers could trade up to take someone like a Terry and Arnold It's probably like the
Oh.
only player I would get like super amped for in the first round, but that feels like a little bit of a pipe dream. I wouldn't mind if they traded out. I just feel like there's a lot of really good value outside of the first round. And for what their biggest needs are, it doesn't feel like they need to take anyone in the first round. And I don't know, like, I don't think they're not going to safety, linebacker, offensive lineman. I mean, there were great offensive linemen in this draft. And if one falls to them in the first round, wonderful. But the value that the Packers historically find at offensive line is not in the first round. And I do not, and I feel supremely confident they're going to leave this draft with like 2 or 3 offensive linemen. And if it's in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round, that's again like very on brand for them. So, I mean, Andrew, you're like, yeah, trade out and get a 2025 pick. I'm like, that might be my favorite option all of a sudden. I haven't heard that one yet.
Well, and it's funny because I think every year, right, there's always the player that you're hoping the Packers don't pick. Cheesehead TV does a whole segment about it. They ask all their writers to select a do not pick option. And I always have a hard time with it because I tend to be a little more objective and like middle of the road than a lot of people. So like a lot of guys have strong feelings about who to take, right? And I'm like, I don't we'll see what happens. Like they make more money than me for a reason. Like they know what they're doing. But there's really, I can't think of a prospect this year that I would like pound the table and say absolutely not. It normally takes me a while to come up with one for this Cheesehead TV segment, but for this particular year, I don't know, I might have to bow out. Like everything makes sense to me. Offensive line makes sense, corner makes sense. Even if they like a wide receiver falls, makes sense. Like there's not really a position where I'm like, oh no, they would never. They pretty much are wide open.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like Johnny Newton, the defensive lineman, Byron Murphy
Yeah.
the second, like one of those guys falls. Wouldn't really be that surprising to me that they're there and the Packers would be interested, even though defensive line not the biggest perceived need. Like Jared
I
Verse
like
falls.
Byron Murphy a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Now that you say his name, he's probably like 1B on my list if I'd be like, oop, I'm excited.
Yeah, and okay, yes, the Packers have all of these perceived needs, but inside pressure is something that you can't replicate in the NFL. And suddenly the Packers are running some horses out there.
Mhm.
And then they're collapsing the pocket, and that's allowing Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith and LVN to clean things up coming off the edge. Like that helps your secondary a lot. So if your second safety isn't as strong, that pass rush is going to make up for a lot of it.
Yeah. I want to ask you about running back because I think, in my opinion, again, like obviously offensive line is the most important need for the Packers on the offensive side of the ball. That's like without a doubt a question. But and I say this every time anyone asks about it, I don't worry that they're going to address that need. I know that they're going to, right? To me, running back is more of that like sneaky need. And they obviously signed Josh Jacobs. That was like the big splash. It completely changed the look of that room. They're bringing back, quote unquote, AJ Dillon. That contract to me means it's actually not necessarily a lost or rock that AJ Dillon is on the team, right? But him and Josh Jacobs are slightly redundant in my mind. They're missing that like shifty speedster, that, Aaron Jones type running back. There's just like a clear hole in that room, but this is not a great class. So I know you named one, but like any other running backs in your mind on your board, and like I think this is a much like later round hole to fill, but like anyone that you would love to see them take to fill that role.
There is a lot of talk that there may not be a running back selected before the end of the second round. Like the assumption is Dallas is going to take a running back at the end of the second round because they have like nobody on their roster. And running is such a big part of, McCarthy's scheme and Dallas's history. But outside of that, it's like, who goes, right? And there's not really a consensus for who the top running back is. I have Trey Benson as mine, but like, ask 6 different people, you might get 5 or 6 different answers. I think for the Packers, it really depends. You're right. A.J. Dillon not guaranteed a roster spot by his contract, but does Matt LaFleur feel differently? Because we know A.J. Dillon really secure in pass pro. Like, he's not electric, but he's a solid running back. He's going to get what's blocked in front of him. He's going to be secure with the ball, which is something we probably have taken for granted in Green Bay since Ahman Green early career. And, he's a reliable veteran player that's going to be super cheap. So maybe the Packers do view him as more of a lock than we do outside of the building, but it depends what they're looking for, right? Like you could get, I think Trey Benson, really electric, but maybe more well-rounded. I am not very high on Jalen Wright. I am probably the lowest person you will find on Jalen Wright from Tennessee, but he is electric. And so if they believe like we're going to be facing light boxes and you're not going to have to make too many decisions because vision is my big question mark with him, maybe they really like him. Isaac Guerendo, who was at Wisconsin, then Louisville, he is a like Raz freak. And so like not a lot of college production, but maybe, you're seeing a guy who can be a better pro than he was a college player. There's a lot of people that really like Marshawn Lloyd from USC. Blake Corum is like Blake Corum. He's not really like great at anything, but he just gets a lot of rushing yards. And yeah, his offensive line was phenomenal in college, but sometimes those guys are really good in the pros. You don't have to be great at any, like Aaron Jones. I never thought he was like particularly great at anything. Maybe vision, maybe quickness in the hole. You could say he has elite traits, but like nothing that like pops to the casual fan. And Blake Corum, kind of the same thing, right? Yeah. Although the Chargers are probably going to draft him, right?
Jim Harbaugh, probably, but like Blake is just like literally just solid at everything. Like he just like gets the job done.
Yeah, and
he's like those Adrian Amos of running backs.
Good pull. Yeah. And like if the Packers want to get really, really redundant and add a third guy who's exactly the same as what they have, Braylon Allen is out there.
We talked about this. Yeah.
Jonathan Brooks is probably the best player in this class, but he won't be available till mid-season maybe. And so like maybe the Packers are like, we can make it to mid-season and then we're going to have this guy coming in really, really fresh. I like Dylan Lobb. I think that's how you pronounce his last name, out in New Hampshire. Kind of a fun, like open space, really good receiver kind of back. Will Shipley out of Clemson. I'm higher on him than just about anybody. To me, he's like an elite pass catching back, really fast. Maybe not like the best true running back, but if the Packers are like, well, we already have Josh Jacobs and we just want a third round guy, I think he's really fun. Most people like Audric Estime. I don't know how you say the Notre Dame running back's last name, but a lot of people really like him. So like there's going to be a bunch of players from that late second round till probably mid to late fourth round that are going to go from the running backs. And it's sort of just like pick your flavor.
I kind of just like feel like the Packers should get like a fun speedster. Like that's just like what they don't have. I mean, obviously like, Jayden Reed is more of that. And like we've seen Matt LaFleur like kind of use him a little bit in the run game in like those fun, creative ways. But like I'd rather them use Jayden Reed as like who he is, which is wide receiver, and get an actual running back like as that kind of like counterpart version in the backfield.
So his overall grade on my scale is not very good, because his athletic testing was truly atrocious. But one of the most fun players in this class to me is Bucky Irving out of Oregon. His tape shows like an electric guy and his testing didn't at all. So I guess what it comes down to is, does the team say, oh, maybe something was going on there, or maybe he just has football speed? If you don't think he's tricking you and you can get Bucky Irving in the fourth or fifth round, I think he could be an incredible steal.
Yeah, that's like flyer territory too, where the Packers stop caring so much about Ras.
Yeah.
Also, Bucky Irvin is like if you rolled up a created character on Madden. So it's a very strong football name. I think there's a lot of upside there. But Andrew, talk to me about Tyrone Tracy, because I don't know. I think he'd be so fun. It's not often you get a wide receiver that played 4 whole years collegiately and then all of a sudden decides to transfer to running back for a year. So if Perry's talking about like some niche, like weird flyer that can do all these random things in the Matt LaFleur offense as a gadget, I love him. But I also think that he's, kind of an anomaly when it comes to the position, since he only has 1 true year actually playing running back.
Yeah, so my notes on him are less than enticing, so
Fair.
I'll talk through this. So, like, to me, he was kind of the polar opposite of Bucky Irving in that I didn't think he looked super explosive on tape, and then he tested out of his mind. So, like, there's something missing there. Was he just maybe a little hesitant as a running back because he didn't really play running back very much, right? Like, he's learning this position on the fly at like the highest level possible in college. He, to me, like, as a running back, he's the definition of a player who's going to get what is blocked for him +1, which is not bad. Like, if he's a mid-round guy, like, you don't want to take that guy in the first round, but like, that's a skill, right? Just number one, getting what's blocked for you will keep you in the NFL. And if you can get what's blocked for you +1, then, you're probably going to be a serviceable backup. Worst case, a third string guy. His wide receiver experience, I think, didn't show as much on tape as I would have liked because he was running back routes. And that's tricky, right? Like, I think he's the kind of guy where he'll just continue to grow. There's a lot in front of him. That athletic testing made me more confident in what Tyrone Tracy can be. And I think, like, if you have a creative offensive play caller who can, motion him out, see if you can get him lined up with a slow linebacker and then just abuse that. Or, if you're going to get the defense with light boxes, he's a guy that you're pretty confident that can get you some yards. And I do like the wide receiver background in terms of a special teams player, because we know running back 3 is going to have to play special teams. Wide receivers typically a little bit more experienced in doing the things that you need to do in order to be a gunner, or, I don't even know what kick coverage looks like anymore, but, to do those kind of things.
I think that the Jonathan Brooks addition would make so much sense, like too much sense, but he was probably my favorite running back prospect from this draft. And just thinking about someone who like sat behind Bijan Robinson, sat behind Roschon Johnson, met with the Packers, but tore his ACL. So, he's not going to start right away. Like, I think the Packers have that luxury of there's really nowhere outside of potentially safety that they need someone to come in and be a day one starter. And maybe they love Anthony Johnson Jr. Like, we don't know what some of those rooms look like. So to be afforded the luxury that, hey, if they don't take an offensive lineman until day 3, they love Rasheed Walker in the building. They love Zach Tom. And I think that's where things get really interesting too, right? If they think Zach Tom is a Hall of Fame center and then all of a sudden right tackle becomes a need. I mean, I'm just saying it depends, because we look at players on the interior like a Graham Barton or a Powers Johnson who plays center, and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, maybe center's not the need we thought it was, because now all of a sudden they're desperate for a right tackle. So I don't know.
I feel so strongly about this take. Like, I feel Andrew, I want your opinion as well. Because I do, to your point, Maggie, think it does impact the draft actually a lot. But like, my opinion is, like, when you have a player who is playing extraordinarily well, Pro Bowl level well, at an important position that is tackle, you do not move him unless you have someone who is that good or better. Like, you just don't. So I think, like, you continue, tackle to me is more important than interior. You can always move people inwards. I feel like it's a lot harder to move people outwards. So you continue, like the Packers always do, to draft tackles, and you can develop them into interior linemen. But I do not want to see the Packers take a center or interior lineman early in the draft. I think that is a absolute waste, when if they needed to, they could move someone like a Zach Tom inwards, but they should not be replacing him with someone unless they have someone just as good, and if not better.
Yeah, I agree with almost everything you said. The only thing is I do think center is like a sneaky undervalued position in the NFL. And it's weird because we measure some of that as like the top centers in the league are so poorly compensated compared to guards and tackles. And that's true. There's just, it's fewer of them. So I think that does play a role. And there's some sort of artificial deflating of their salaries. But I'm totally on board with like Zach Tom is a really, really good right tackle. Could be on the precipice of being a great right tackle. The whole idea that like he's automatically going to be a Hall of Fame center if you move him there, even if he has that ability, I've never seen him take a snap in a live game. I mean, maybe he has and I'm just missing it, but like that is just because you snapped in college doesn't mean you can do it in the pros. Like suddenly you have the Kenny Clarks of the world lined up directly across from you. And like, that makes life very, very different. So yeah, I would much prefer that they keep him at right tackle. A good to great right tackle is worth their weight in gold. And I would, appreciate them not messing with that too much.
Hey, that's when my stock went up for Sean Ryan, is when he came in during the Rams game and was like, "Hey, Aaron Donald." And it was like, "Okay, yeah, you're going to be good at this." Like, great, not worried anymore. But I think this is really interesting that it seems like the Packers and fans always want to toy with a good thing. And
Yes.
the example that I'm thinking of is very recent, and it's Elton Jenkins. It was, can he be their left tackle? Can he play right tackle? Like, he did well, out of necessity, but then they were like, "Oh, you move him to a guard and he's probably on, like, let him be where he's comfortable and he's going to get you Pro Bowls and all pros." And I think that's just really funny, is now Elton Jenkins has solidified his spot at left guard, and there's no more like, should we move him around? He's locked in. And now it's like, what about Zach Tom? Should we move Zach Tom now? And it's like, let's
If it ain't
that's
broke,
five.
don't fix it.
That's
Like
five.
it's an original like adage for a reason. And I feel like the line is like there's two positions right now in my mind that are like 100% solidified out of the five with no questions. And it's, to your point, Maggie, left guard and right tackle. Like we just watched Zach Tom have like a phenomenal season. And it's like, why tinker with that when the other, if the other, I don't know, if the only questions right now was center, right? If like center was just a big fat question mark, the other four were like, maybe we have another option at right tackle. So maybe we just make a little move over. Everything else is solid. That's only one variable to change. Let's try it out. But that's not the case here. There are too many open variables at the moment to make that move and then have any like chance of understanding if it's like going to work out or not, because there's just too many other moving parts at the moment. I think like solidify the other obvious issues. And then if you want to try Zach Tom and center, like, because like everything's like beautiful and perfect and you think he can be even better there, like, sure. But like the other open variables like need to be solid first.
Yeah, I don't totally understand the perceived need at left tackle either. Like for Rasheed Walker, was he dominant at left tackle? No. But he was also a second-year player who was a seventh rounder getting his first experience, and he was rotating in most of the season.
That's the big
and
thing.
Towards the end of the year, he looked to me really solid, and that kind of promise going forward, I think, is something you can stick with. Yes, they need depth at tackle, but we don't know how the Packers feel about Luke Tenuta, or I'm forgetting Caleb Jones.
Caleb Jones.
Yeah, the giant guy. We don't know how they feel about them. Maybe they're like, yeah, we think they can be pretty solid backup and play in a pinch. And so maybe tackle isn't that big of a need. I think that's always something you look at. And if somebody falls in your lap, great. But like, do they need to go hunting for offensive tackle? I don't necessarily think so.
It's hard when your bar is David Bakhtiari also.
Right.
I think like that's like you're being a little bit set up to fail in the eyes of the public when the bar is very, very high. Like your shoes that you're filling are pretty large. But I think the Packers are still going to take a tackle. To your point, is that because they always just happen to take tackles in the draft, and then they're like, you played tackle in college, now we're just going to figure out where you fit on the line. That's like kind of their blueprint.
Yeah, for sure. And the big thing for me is like, okay, so center and right guard can't both be below average because you can't have weak spots next to each other on the line. That's a big thing. Nobody has 5 all pros. So like maybe they think Josh Myers is going to turn a corner this year. Sometimes for centers, it turns on a little bit later than other positions. Maybe Sean Ryan is that guy. Or maybe they just think that both of them are kind of like solid, average, maybe even backup quality, and they're going to go get somebody. But I agree with you. I don't think it has to be in the first round. Maybe they love Graham Barton, but I don't think so. I just don't see interior offensive line early.
Yeah, especially in the first round. It feels a little rich. And now the Packers will probably surprise us and do that. But that's definitely one of those positions where we've seen them hit so many times that to invest a first rounder, they have to feel really confident in who they're picking.
Since we're on the subject.
Yes, go ahead.
All right. We got to ask because he's been such a topic of conversation. And I feel like every time we talk about the draft, we got to talk about Amarius Mims because he's so controversial and everyone has such a strong opinion about him. So give it to us, Andrew. What is your opinion on the 6'8", 340-pound athletic freak who has barely played?
Kind of sweet and spicy, Amarius Mims. Like barbecue sauce. I love Amarius Mims. He is my 14th overall player in this draft. Like, sign me up. Like, he is what would happen if you built a left tackle in a lab. Like, I know he's too tall. He weighs too much. Like, this dude is giant and he moves like much smaller players. And so, like, I think, you love size, you love his length, you love his movement skills. He's got great strength. He is just really raw. And that's because he didn't get to take that many snaps. So as a result, sometimes his feet get out of sync. I think he gets like too wide in his base. His hand placement can be a little like, I wrote down the term jabby. Like he'll try to reach out and like stab somebody instead of latch on. He can get off balance at times. But like you get him with a good O-line coach, and Green Bay has been notoriously good for offensive line coaching. I think you're talking about like a potential all-pro guy who can just like swallow up small pass rushers, and he's got enough movement skills to stick with them. Nobody is going to bull rush this guy. So once he gets the footwork stuff figured out, like I think you throw him on an island and you just have an amazingly good player for 8 to 10 years.
Okay, can I play devil's advocate really quick?
You sure
Going
can.
back to our last conversation, Mims has only played right tackle his entire collegiate career. Could he kick left side? Sure, I'm sure he could. But if he's there, somebody that's allowed no sacks, no pressures, no quarterback hits in his last 3 seasons, right tackle, then do you feel more comfortable with them experimenting with Zach Tom? Like, I'm just saying, like, where's your competition then? If you draft Mims, who are you planning on moving? Are you kicking out Rasheed Walker or are you kicking out Zach Tom? Because Rasheed Walker, to me, is pretty much only a tackle, whereas Zach Tom gives you the versatility that he has other options to be, because he is unequivocally one of your best 5. But then you got to move him.
Are you asking me this question or
anyone can answer?
I think I don't know. I mean, I think you bring Mims is a developmental prospect, right? Yeah. You're not planning on playing him this season. So I don't know if you really need to make that decision like right this moment. I think you bring Mims into the building and you figure out what his best situation is, like what you're going to develop him into.
Yeah, exactly. I would say the plan is he's going to be your backup tackle this year, and unless, nobody can get around him at all in training camp and preseason, then okay, cool. We have the awful problem of having 3 tackles we feel like can play. And
Yeah.
then you probably do have to move Zach Tom, but like, does it have to be center? He could play right guard as well. I think, that's a good question.
Hear
Yeah.
me out. Caleb Jones on the left side and Amarius Mims on the right
Brick
side.
wall.
And Prosper.
Yeah, well, and you could throw one of them in as a sub package tight end and then just run to that side.
Yeah.
Get if you drafted like Bucky Irvin, nobody would be able to see him behind the offensive line. So
Guys, is Matt LaFleur listening?
Hopefully he likes the name of the
My
show.
my other thought to your point, Andrew, about his size and everything is like, okay, because I was talking to my dad about this. My dad was like, yeah, but the Packers will never draft him because he's completely outside the threshold. And I'm like, well, Brian has been, we're on a first name basis. Brian Gutekunst has been known in the past few seasons to stray a little bit outside of those thresholds. And to me, like, to get somebody like Mims, who's as athletically freaky, just like so unique, you just do not find guys with those measurements very often. And I feel like the first round is for taking those types of individuals, right? And figuring out, getting them in your building and figuring out like, how do we mold them into the kind of player we want them to be? It's about projection. I don't think it necessarily matters how much he's played. LVN didn't start, right? And that was like a knock against him, and he's about to be a starter. It clearly doesn't matter. The other thing I was thinking too is like, that was the knock against David Bakhtiari, wasn't it? When he was coming out, his arms were too short. Everyone was like, he can't be a starting left tackle. His arms are too short. Well, illustrious career later, if not for an ACL tear, probably a gold jacket career later. I don't think anybody gives a shit anymore how long David Bakhtiari's arms are. So right. I think you also take some of those things with a little bit of a grain of salt, and you like look, yes, they're important, right? You obviously have to look at somebody's measurements, but you look at it a little bit as like a holistic picture. And somebody like Mims, in terms of his just like big picture, what he could potentially be, like that upside, I think it's hard. I don't know, it'd be hard to pass up.
Yeah, I'm not going to rail back against the like threshold conversation as hard as some people do. I think it's useful data, right?
Yeah.
But just because something hasn't been done doesn't mean it won't in the future. And so one of the things that I'm constantly trying to remind people is we only have 6 years of draft class information on Brian Gutekunst's like thresholds or his preferences, styles, and some of that has been an exception to the Packers' historic ways. So, do we know that he's going to do something just because Ted Thompson did it, just because Ron Wolf did it? Like, I don't automatically draw those assumptions. And Amarius Mims is such a freak athlete. Like, is the reason the Packers shy away from guys that are that heavy because they're typically not good movers, but Amarius Mims is a good mover? Like, and then maybe that like size threshold doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
Exactly.
So I think you have to look at every player kind of individually, and then, you use that as one data point. But if we're trying to be predictive about it, I think Amarius Mims kind of goes into like, we don't know bucket.
Yeah. That's why I bring him up, because I think he's such a fun like example for the conversation around like the Packers draft tendencies and what they like to do and what they could do. And also like the way Brian, to your point, has a little bit strayed, because he's somewhere in the realm, but he kind of has his own like flavor and style. Because like to your point, like he took his first pick ever was Jair Alexander, and everyone was like, no way, Jair's too small, he will never take him. And then he did it anyway in like this crazy trade back, trade up situation. And everyone's like, all right, well, we're in a new era, maybe we have to like rethink the way they do things now.
I feel like what I'm hearing, honestly, is that if the Packers don't take Amarius Mims in the first round, Andrew Mertig is going to print out a screenshot of this YouTube video and eat it.
I might do that anyways.
Barbecue sauce.
Dealer's choice. Okay. Before we wrap the show, I just want to give you the opportunity to call your shot, because every year Perri and I try to pick like a day 3 prospect that we like for the Packers, that we think like under the radar could be the person. And I don't think it's a secret who mine is this year. I was overjoyed when he came in for a top 30 visit, but Kit Oladapo is mine. So please go ahead and give us your, I don't know, whether it's a sneaky draft crush or just a good fit for the Packers. Who's a day 3 guy you've got your eye on for Green Bay?
I have almost no idea. It's so funny because I have done like very little preparation for something like this, but I'm gonna give you one. This is a super deep cut.
Okay.
Safety Trey Taylor out of Air Force.
Okay.
He is a 9. Yeah, exactly. He has a 9.71 RAS. He's somebody that like I liked. Like his film grade's not like crazy good, but I really liked him as a potential developmental guy. He's 22 and a half, which sometimes you have to watch the ages of players that are coming out of the military academies. So he's relatively young. Obviously, usually the military academies come with some really nice intangibles as well. Some leadership qualities, and I thought he tested incredibly well. I think he looks the part on tape. Packers need depth at safety. This is a guy I think could be really awesome on special teams right away, and then maybe he develops into a guy who can fit into that rotation in the secondary.
I love it. Perri, do you have one?
Don't even.
All right. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the show. I feel like we could have talked about the draft for a very long time, but lucky for me, I get to talk to you all of next Friday on day 2 of the Pack-A-Day live show. I don't know why Andy trusted me to lead that whole endeavor, but I'll be there. You'll be there. What could possibly go wrong on day 2 of the draft? But plug anything else you're doing. Twitter handle is on the screen for those that are watching on YouTube, but where can we find you and harass you about all of your draft takes?
Yeah, we're on the Wednesday Pack-A-Day podcast, ? I don't know. We switched days so many times
for now.
I can't even remember, but that's pretty much it. If you want to find me on Twitter, I'm always happy to engage with people that are nice, and I'm really looking forward to. Last year, I ditched Maggie and Kyle on draft night because we closed on our house, and there was a little bit of an emergency that I had to take care of. And so the draft season was very chaotic and hectic for me. So this year, I'm just so looking forward to actually being around and being able to watch and really like hanging out with folks on the Pack-A-Day live stream.
Yeah, that'll be a ton of fun. Thank you, as always, for listening to the show. You can find us on Twitter at PWSS Podcast. You can find Perri on Twitter at Perri_Goldstein. You can find me on Twitter at Maggie J. Loney. Thank you to everyone that likes and subscribes to the show on YouTube. And if you're listening in the audio platform, we appreciate that as well. We'll be back next week with one of my favorite shows all season, is when we do our full 7-round mock draft, compare them, see if we get any picks right. Normally we don't, but that's what makes it fun. So thank you, as always, for listening to the show. And go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.